Everyone's tuning in to our Dealmakers Live. And so great thing that we're hopefully putting together and bringing to you on a frequent basis. Super excited to be here, across the various social platforms and everything else. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tom Lenfestey, CEO and founder of the Law Practice Exchange. And with me, my expert co-host of all things legal for law firms and beyond, Jonathan Hawkins. Jonathan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, Jonathan Hawkins. I'm the founder of Law Firm GC. We are a law firm and lawyers that represent lawyers and law firms.
Absolutely. Jonathan and I have talked a lot, over the last years, but specifically over the last year or so, as the market for, law firm deals and everything really evolve and change. And one of the things I think, Jonathan, you and I have agreed on that we both share in common is we're a little bit crazy to go full, like, we're going to help just lawyers, right? Like, that is our thing, is we are just going to help lawyers. And I think when you started your law firm, when did you start your law firm?
So I started the law firm. It's coming up on 9 years. I started
Okay.
the practice probably about 15 years ago,
Right.
but I spun out the law firm about almost 9 years ago now.
And focused on helping, being a lawyer to lawyers, which I say, as lawyers, right, it's hard for us sometimes to ask for help. It's really hard sometimes to ask another lawyer for help, but I think that expertise has proved you well over the years to really know that, whether it's ethical structure, transactional, succession, right, buy sell, where we've connected. And similar aspect. I mean, a lot of people thought I was crazy to go into just helping lawyers buy and sell law firms back in 2013. But I think you and I get excited about where, just the evolution of things are today. There's changes, there's challenges. But that's part of what we wanted to bring is this Dealmakers Live is there's so much that happens behind the scenes. And Jonathan and I have talked a lot, off camera, everything else about this is a small pond, but there's a lot of activity, a lot of moving pieces. Our goal is to bring some of those other players that we know well, right, that are completing deals, helping work that onto this live platform for some Q&A and just discussion and just other aspects, right? I mean, I think, Jonathan, the big thing is the evolution of what's happening in the marketplace for law firm sales and succession.
It's been fun to watch. And I know you took a risk many years ago to start this niche practice. And, back then, really, there was really two paths, for sales, and that was internal and maybe an external, but primarily internal. The historical, you emerge or you sort of laterally move to another firm. Those were really the only options. And then, you know, within the last not even 12 months or so, boom, new options. So
Yeah, it's been fun, right? And it's been fun because I think, what everybody's asking about is private equity's entrance, right, to the market. And I tell everybody, it was really funny. I did a middle market live or, their podcast, which largely is private equity, kind of looking at that space, not law firm specific. And I did that podcast for the first time, I think a little over 2 years ago. And Jonathan, I mean, you know this because it's probably how your phone rang too, but it was like, all of a sudden it was private equity calling, like, hey, we're really interested. And it took a little while to figure out, right, like how it would work. Do they have to go to Arizona to buy a law firm, right? What does that mean? Which law firms and everything else would they be interested in? And, you and I probably dealt with those calls back then where they'd come in and say, look, I'm looking for, 20 million EBITDA, right? Estate planning firm, closely held. And you'll be like, great, I'd love to find that too, right? Like there's probably some out there. And if there are, give Jonathan or I, a heads up, give us a call. But overall, as private equity learns and educates and kind of goes through that, I think that was a big part of the evolution where, again, right now, I think you would agree, they're focused on personal injury, from the most start. I think that's probably most of the deals you've seen to date, Jonathan.
yes, personal injury, other sort of related contingency, although I'm starting to see family law a little bit.
Hmm.
I know you've seen some of that too. I have not personally seen, but I'm aware of potentially some immigration firms. I've known people in the past that set up just for their own servicing MSOs, not for sale and not in connection with the sale, but it's starting to branch out a little bit. So we'll see.
And that's kind of, let's do this as like a market pulse piece, right? Like what you're seeing in the market, what we're seeing in the market from that side, right? Personal injury has probably been the primary talked about deals completed. As you mentioned, starting to see, different PE, I'll call it back platforms, I think, looking at other areas or doing deals. What are you seeing the size of those firms that they're kind of targeting in other areas?
The ones that I've seen outside of PI are pretty big.
Mhm.
I mean, they're not behemoths, but I would say they're good sized firms. I don't want to put out too much personal numbers here,
$20
but
million EBITDA estate planning firm, people would be able to probably find it, right? So,
yeah,
yeah.
I have never seen or heard of one of those. Maybe it exists somewhere, but you're right. If there is one out there, I'd love to meet them. There'd be a lot of people that want to be interested. I'll say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things, that we've seen, at least on our side, in kind of working on the M&A side from the advisory or putting these together is, when private equity came into this space, they learned, but they also started to build out, I'll call it their operations plan, right? So MSO, which is this structure we can talk about a little bit as well, this managed service organization, has become the chosen vehicle for private equity to invest in law firms. That said, most of them kind of built out for personal injury, right? And now I think what we're seeing in kind of moving is they're building out for other practice areas, right? And realizing that some of those practice areas, can be large, but also some of them don't come with the high, EBITDAs or otherwise the high financial of personal injury, but they built more the operations, then they're kind of ready to invest. And I think that's where we see good deals being completed compared to just, hey, we got a lot of money to invest in family law. Well, what's your plan once you actually, invest or find those family law and they don't have that, platform built yet?
Yes, and sorry to sort of cut off here, but there's some questions showing up in the chat. I don't know if and when how you want to address those,
You
but
can address it now. Absolutely.
so question: does a solo in estate planning belong here? I've got an answer. I'm sure you do too, Tom. So I'll kick it
I'll
to you
I'll let
first.
you go first.
Okay. Yes. So we've been throwing out, this $20 million EBITDA number, but I'll tell you right now, at least the way I see it, the private equity that is interested is really looking for bigger platforms. But there is a huge opportunity for someone or many someones to begin to do their own smaller acquisitions and build the firm that someone else is going to want. And I have definitely gotten a lot of interest on that on both sides. People that want to sort of transition out of their practice, but also some that want to build their practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, from a solo standpoint, most of who I think, we deal with are solo or small partnerships, right? Now, the size of the firm depends on, can vary greatly. But what I would tell you from a true solo estate planning, what we do at the Law Practice Exchange, I mean, we built a whole platform to help, what I'll call everyday law firms transact. And as Jonathan mentions, there's a lot out there that are looking for good platforms to acquire. Or maybe you're in that, you'd like to acquire, kind of mindset and everything else as part of your growth plan. So, absolutely. The headlines right now, and that's a good point, Jonathan. I think the headlines for all of this market are really PE, right? Regulatory changes for MSO, everything else. But there's this market that's been around forever and still a very proven market, which is law firm buyer, law firm seller, right? Or lawyer, buyer, law firm seller, and kind of carrying that forward. And I think that probably has just fallen off the radar for some, and everybody believes PE is the only one buying firms out there. I would tell you that that's just not the truth. Most of the deals we still see, especially in our marketplace, are all lawyer to lawyer.
And I see a lot of estate planning firms do
Okay.
deals. I know you do too, Tom. A lot of them.
Yeah, and I think that's, when we look at even where those growth platforms are looking, everything else is, consumer services, right firms. So when you look at immigration, family law, estate planning, it's those different aspects that could be scalable could potentially benefit from, just different business, offering services, anything else, whether it's marketing, great tech, great others. And that can come again where we've seen estate planning buyers, like law firms that have rolled up estate planning firms and kind of built out. They've tried to create best in class services and really do a hub type model for that so that you, if you're in a smaller geographical town or something else, you don't have to invest in the same tech, everything else. Like they're going to try to do that. And from the marketing side and everything else, that you can have a team, a fractional part of what's delivered to you, to really carry that forward. So I think the most, when we look at large scale deals versus small, deals, the exciting part about moving, private equity into the space, I tell people, Jonathan, is private equity came in where for years we had really, worked with lawyers who were pretty risk adverse, right? I mean, we are. You and I may fall on the, one end of the spectrum on that, but still risk adverse as lawyers. And I think the biggest thing that PE came in and said, oh yeah, law firms have value and we're willing to, pay a significant amount of money for that value. And all of a sudden it just, especially for like large PI, it reset, the market, right? To where, 12 months prior to that, we would have calls from law firms that says, well, we want to buy law firms, but we're only willing to do like an earn out, a percentage of deal. Otherwise, we're not willing to take the risk, of that, where PE really came in and, kind of set the market, for at least that scale, right? I think for others, and everything else, it's still the traditional market.
Great point. So I've seen more and more LOIs, letters of intent, interest from, I'll call them institutional investors, buyers. But that has caused more law firms, actual law firms, to be submitting LOIs to buy other law firms.
Yeah.
And you're right, it has reset both the structure and the pricing on the firms. It's raised it, at least from what I've seen. And so that's the interesting thing about the institutional investors making it on the scene, has created more acknowledgement or recognition that, hey, this is a real value and this is something that we can buy. And so others are now trying to do that.
I think the other part of it too is we're starting to see, buyers kind of shape in different ways, anything else. So a lot of people look at law firms as like, that's one type of buyer. And then you have private equity over here as the other type of buyer, right? Under an MSO, anything else. What I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, probably because you're involved in helping structure some of this, is law firms that have an MSO, right, which may have kind of, partnered with private capital as part of their growth acquisition plan, everything else. So now it is a law firm. They run things just like they have, but they essentially have, sought private capital through a partnership or otherwise, just like, previously they could have done, or they could have gone out and borrowed, 10 million, $100 million or whatever else to do the same investment in tech and otherwise. And I think that's where it's going to get real blurry over the next 24 months is you're going to see a lot of buyers that are quote unquote law firms, but they are partnered or, kind of under a structure of an MSO with another, but that's just based on choice.
Agreed. And you're right. So a lot of the law firms are backed and they have some sort of they have backing or an MSO or other behind them, but not all of them. I've gotten lots of calls from folks that say, hey, we want to try to build something that someone else may want or build our own platform. And there's lots of excitement, interest, activity out there. People, lots of deals trying to be made. Some will get made, some won't. But again, it's just I'm getting more and more calls every day. And I know, Tom, I mean, that's your business. I bet you could probably go back and chart out the call volume. And over the last 9 months, hockey stick up, I imagine.
Yeah, I could tell you it's been pretty significant. And the interesting part we're seeing now, and I think PI is probably a good predictor, is headlines seem to motivate, right? And I think it has a potential to motivate both ways, like seller and buyer. Because you mentioned that, like you're seeing more and more law firms as those buyers moving forward because now there's a new competition in play or otherwise. But the interesting part that we've really seen is, headlines, or it's just, like, it's easy now to get an email database and just blast everybody and say, hey, I'm interested in your law firm. And when they, talk to somebody and anything else, it's like, great. I think I'm going to get a, 10 multiple when I go sell. And, so headlines are moving kind of, interest, which I think is great in a way. And I think the next step is probably moving past headline to education. Like, a headline multiple sounds great until you're like, hey, look, that was $100 million law firm, and the way it was paid out was actually like a debt restructure, where, it's really not, nobody got $100 million cash. It's this kind of line they can pull from, and the real amount of cash at risk was like 10 million bucks, right? So, that's a totally different deal than you wanting to sell your $10 million personal injury firm, right? And so I do think it's interesting. And I just wanted to see what you thought, Jonathan, about what you think like Q3, Q4 is going to look like, partly based on your pipeline, and then really, what do you predict for next year? Like, I think a lot of people see it as, is there a bubble? Is there kind of a slowdown? Is there just this holding, where things are going to go?
Well, I can tell you my Q3, Q4 is really busy. The pipeline, we've got a lot of closings set for the fall into the end of the year. I would imagine, probably just by virtue of these funds needing to deploy capital, that they want to get a lot done before the end of the year. So I think, and I'm not on, there's a whole lot of deals I'm not on. So I'm seeing a big uptick. I know they're going on in a lot of places. So through the end of the year, I expect a lot of activity, a lot of activity. Next year, who knows? I expect it to keep going, but, I can't see the future exactly, but I expect this to keep going. I came across this article a couple weeks ago, and it was talking about private equity MSO deals in medical. And medical's been doing this for 2 decades plus. And that article said, I don't know where they got the stats, but they said between 2020 and 2025, there was an average of 500 PE MSO deals in medical each year. And that's 20 years in.
Right.
Law firms have just started. We're in the first inning. So, there may be some up and down and cycles, but I imagine it's going to keep going for a long time.
Yeah, I think to your point, on the private equity side, absolutely, right? Like there's a lot of those deals that are, I'll call in due diligence right now, right? With your team or otherwise, and kind of working through with private equity. And then as we talked about, just the market. So there's generational aspects that, we could talk about what is the age demographic of somebody who owns a law firm right now, right? And that's typically going to be a senior demographic, a baby boomer generation still has the need for a succession plan. And so we've really seen an uptick, and that's part of, I think, again, there's more talk about buying and selling law firms. There's more talk about succession planning, which you and I are fans of for that exit option. But we're seeing more interest. This last quarter, our marketplace, which what I'll call is your everyday deals, has outpaced, private market. And some of that's availability, right, of those deals. Like, where are the good law firms that potentially are interested in an exit strategy, a succession strategy, right? Maybe they don't meet PE characteristics from that side, right? As it's kind of ramps up and everything else. But overall, there's other great law firms looking to grow through acquisition, or other great lawyers that are looking for ownership opportunities. And so we see that pacing up. You kind of call volume and everything else. That actually has picked up. Also, the size of the firms that are looking at that has picked up a little bit as we kind of track the revenue size and, the financial size of those. Where I'd say for a long time it was very small firms, and now you're starting to see that kind of, I'd say mid-tier, but it really puts, it's kind of that, under 10 million, but they're kind of looking at what is that plan, and they know that, hey, I probably built something here that is worth something that we can kind of carry forward and do that, right?
I think that's a great point. So you mentioned earlier about education. For decades, many lawyers I would talk to just hear this: my firm's, nobody's going to buy my firm. It's not worth anything.
Right.
And so the plan was, maybe you had a child who became a lawyer and you would transition it to your son or daughter. Maybe you had an internal lawyer, but that you could transition to. But most lawyers, I think, just said, I'm just going to wrap things up, turn the lights off, and go home. But now people realize, hey, there's something here potentially. And I tell people every law firm is worth something, something. Some are just worth more than others, depending on, the facts on the ground. But every law firm, there is something worth buying to somebody else. It may just be a client list. I don't know. But there are things.
Yeah, I know you and I have given talks on this over the years, and there's always this part of like, look, based on that premise, your firm is worth something. The question is where, right on the scale it lands. But the painful part to me, and I'm sure to you, is like when you walk away and been like, I'll just wind it down, right? Or you start that wind down process. So if you're a solo estate planning attorney, your firm has value. If you're looking to grow that, through acquisition, wonderful. If you're looking to exit it, there's options there for you, right? You have to be reasonable in your expectations, go through all that, everything else. But that's the part of where I think like this is the great part about like an emotional shift of the market is the opportunity to really say it's not just about what your income is, right? What you're able to pay yourself. If you're a small law firm, anything else, it's building something that has value when you're ready to step aside, right? And I think that's the cool part that you and I know has really not been it has not been a known aspect of any law firm owner's mindset over the last decade. But I'm super excited that hopefully that's changing over the next decade to where they're like, great, the things I do today is not just to help my top line revenues or my bottom line income or anything else. It's really to build exit value and, start planning ahead by making sure they're doing the right things to get there.
That's another great point, which I think this interest in the news and all the publicity around this has got people thinking, hey, there might be something worth selling. But then they look internally, they talk to some folks like me and you and others, and then they say, wait, we're not ready. But then they say, okay, if I do these things over the next several years, I can get it in a place that has more value and would have more interest from buyers. And so I think the education piece there and the publicity is good on that also, because people, again, if you know it might be worth something later, you probably will take steps now that you might not have taken, a few years ago if you thought it wasn't worth anything.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I think everybody wants to know is like, what's the multiple, right? Like the value, the multiple. And that's, of course, what's getting a lot of headlines, especially in PI and personal injury or single event or plaintiff practices, because there's, I heard so and so got this, right? Or anything else from that side. And I can tell you what we're seeing is the multiples are increasing, right? So the multiples are increasing. And so much depends on what type of scale, firm, and what value you have built. So I'll kind of separate this out. And then, Jonathan, I'm going to turn over to you to either disagree with me with what you're seeing, because I think there's a good likelihood that that could happen just based on the amount of deal flow right now. But overall, if you are still an everyday, law firm, you're still floating in somewhere between a 2.5 to a 3.5 multiple on your adjusted net income. Call it EBITDA, call it seller discretionary earnings, whatever you want to call it, but somewhere in that range, right? Is that super exciting if you're a law firm owner and you could sell and make 2.5 times what that number is? Maybe, maybe not, right? For a while, the personal injury firm owners of a larger scale, even though they would push above that, they weren't super excited about it. With deals now kind of getting pressure from private equity, seeking to invest their funds for the platform, anything else, those have started to push up for the larger scale, what I'll call branded, geographically still dominant firms, to the point now where you're past four, you're moving past five, you're moving past six for the larger ones and the more dominant ones. Again, it's not just brand, it's going to be your systems, how well, what's your profit margin, how much opportunity is there for growth and everything else in your market and beyond. And I think you're starting to see that there's going to be some premium ones at that 10 mark, right, for a multiple. The hardest part for us is if you're a personal injury firm owner and you're doing 10 million in revenue, making 2 million EBITDA, are you a 10? And the answer is no. But overall, as this market shifts and everything else, you were a 3.5 or a 3 before, you're potentially a 4, 4.5, 5 with the right strategic, buyer or kind of investment inquirer or anything else. So we're seeing those multiples move. Outside of PI, we're still seeing a move, but they're really staying put with who your typical buyer is, a law firm otherwise, compared to a MSO type buyer that may be coming into immigration, family law otherwise, and they really want to make you a primary play. Those multiples can push up as well. The substance of everything, everybody wants to know the multiple, but deal terms matter most. And so what I'll tell you is, you'll get your multiple, but who is it with and how are you really getting it? And are you assured you're going to get it as that? So that's my side of it. Jonathan, seeing the same, something different otherwise?
Seeing the same, and all of that's true. So smaller the firm, the smaller the multiple. That's just at least right now, and those probably will float up over the next few years. But but it's always going to be that way. The bigger the enterprise, the more enterprise value, and the higher the multiple is going to be. There's also a factor, if it's an institutional investor's first buy, and they just need to deploy some capital, maybe they're willing to pay a little bit more than after they've done 10 deals. So maybe there's a certain jurisdiction they want. There's all sorts of factors that can come into this thing to affect the multiple. And, like you said, you get your value and it looks like a big number, but then there's all these terms that can apply to it. That can sort of change the real economics of it. Then the thing to think about in these deals is you are basically gaining a partner. It's going to be a partner for at least 5 years, maybe longer. So you want to make sure it's somebody that you can work with, somebody that you trust, somebody that you think knows what they're doing, that doesn't just have a pile of money and says, "Hey, let's do this." And so there's a lot of factors other than the price or the multiple that I think really should maybe be as important or maybe more important long term in these deals.
I think that's a huge point. Now, again, we have seen over the years, and we kind of started to break down that a law firm deal is made up because even under those private equity MSO deals, you are partnering with them, right? You're truly partnering. If you're doing a law firm deal, you're probably transitioning for a while at least. It may be shorter than the private equity MSO deal, but overall, you still are there's a partnership feel, right? And so we always told everybody the most successful deals come down to checking the boxes on two things. One was financials. Of course you want your multiple. Of course you want, this much cash down, this much commitment. Make sure who you're kind of getting paid from and the promise of payments and everything else is structured properly. But the other is fit. And that fit component for lawyers, we have seen historically matters more than the financials. Like they're willing to give on financials for the fit. And I think that's the real interesting part. And what you kind of hit on, Jonathan, is like it's their legacy and it's very, we're proud of it, especially if you're partnering with us for the next 3 to 5 years. You really want to make sure that fit is there. And that's a little bit different due diligence than just who's my highest bidder, right?
And as you said, the legacy piece, a big component of that, a lot of people want to make sure their people are taken care of.
Yeah.
That they're not dropping the mic and then their people are going to get scattered to the wind. That's both on the big scale and the small scale. I know you've seen it where people say, I want to make sure Jimmy or Susie or whoever's taken care of and that they have a job. And so you got to trust who's going to be on the other side, that they're going to keep them involved and make sure that it all the deal terms and the structure fits and your legacies, continues if that's what's important to you.
Absolutely. Next time we do this, hopefully next month, I would love to dive into MSO regulations and kind of where those are falling on a state by state basis, because I think that's a good conversation topic for us lawyers to have about how states are trying to, essentially regulate and kind of try to put some opinions out there. I think that would consume a good amount of our time and everything else and be helpful to all those. Anything else that you want to kind of, share at this point with the market or what you're seeing or just different things that, listeners, law firm owners, otherwise should be aware of?
Maybe this is for next time, but we've been talking about the MSO structure. We did not really touch on the ABS very much with Arizona, and I think that's what really seems to have opened the door to a lot of people. And the whole thought then was that non-lawyers were going to own law firms, and it was started in Arizona. It was going to spread everywhere. But what we've seen is every state seems to be shutting that down, and it's really isolating that ABS structure to Arizona. So we'll see. But my feeling is at least that structure is sort of dead long term. I don't see it really doing much outside of Arizona. I don't know what you
Yeah.
think.
No, I think that's a great segue. I would agree with you. I think, Puerto Rico made a play to become an ABS as well. Those, because of MSO structure and everything else, I think they've got some challenges. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of deep dive on that next month as we get together. One of the things I kind of wanted to leave with, because, of our question, should a solo estate planning attorney be here? I think one of the exciting things, and I'm kind of already alluded to it, is we are now seeing, there's headlines with private equity interested in M law firms, right? So it makes sense. Big law firms, right, are going to do these deals with private equity under an MSO structure or something else. Then the headlines is, big personal injury doing deals under the same aspect. But we are seeing, capital backed, structures, whether those are law firms or other MSO type structures that have really built, I'll call them, really what they're trying to do is best in class services. And they are making moves to acquire law firms, not of 10 million EBITDA, right? Smaller, but solid businesses and everything else. And I think the exciting part when I look to next year, Jonathan, is really for us, especially because our marketplace is really fueled by everyday law firms, right? Is seeing those kind of move. And right now, like the exciting part is they're making primary plays and they're trying to build so that they can go out and acquire, smaller but the right geographic market firms that they can make, better and kind of carry that forward. So for me, just a takeaway is, I would say the opportunities that are starting at the top, there is kind of that filtering through to where it's really going to be an opportunity for the everyday law firm. And that's happening now. But I think it's really going to speed up as we go to the end of the year into next year.
And I would just say, as somebody who used to run a solo practice, um, you know, it's if you don't grow, and there's a lot of risk to trying to grow. If you don't grow, you're sort of capped out. So there is, some benefit for sure. If you can tap into some of those structures, you get all these other benefits that you don't get on your own. So
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan, this was fun. Look forward to doing it again. And what I would say is for anybody out there listening now or anything else, I'm sure you can, find myself or Jonathan via LinkedIn or our respective. Any questions you have, anything you want us to deep dive on, I think we'd be open to doing so. The real goal is to try to bring more, information and education, to the market overall, whether it's on succession, whether it's on current deals that are kind of processing. I think, Jonathan, I'll kind of give you credit for this, and hopefully it's the same. You've been in it for a long time helping lawyers. And so that part is known. I think the interesting part is when you're helping with, like, top three transactions, private equity transactions or otherwise, like the scale of where you're helping compared to, again, you're also helping those solo estate planning attorneys, right? And you've been built to help lawyers, the same as what we've been built to help the everyday, law firm up to, the larger, firms of scale. And so, kudos to you for building a team that's there to help lawyers through this. And your foundation is that you guys know law, right? Like,
thanks, Tom. You too. You too. We're sort of kindred spirits in some regard when we started.
yeah, or gluttons for punishment. I'm not sure
Yeah.
which, right? Because we chose to, deal with lawyers as clients and everything else, and we can joke, about that. But I think the most passionate and exciting stuff for Jonathan and I is to really help and to see this market move and do that. And that's what we're going to try to do on this Dealmakers. And then anything else that anybody needs, just let us know. Jonathan, this has been great. Look forward to the next one. And everybody staying tuned for the next Dealmakers Live.
Thanks, Tom.